Real stories of werewolves, of dogman from history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
My wife hates my werewolf friend. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've decided it's time to share my story, something I've kept to myself for far too long. I'm sending this to you anonymously because frankly I don't want people thinking that I'm insane. But I think it's a tale worth telling, and maybe it'll resonate with some of your listeners. This all started about a decade ago when I was hiking in the woods near my home. I like to get away from things and clear my head, you know? So one day I saw something that changed my life. At first I thought it was just a big dog or a wolf, but it was too big. Then it stood up on two legs and looked right at me. I didn't know what to make of it. Could this be the legendary Midwestern dogman? I wasn't sure. I remember that first encounter vividly. I froze, not sure if I should run or stay still. The werewolf-like creature, let's call it a dogman, didn't seem aggressive. It just watched me curiously. I slowly backed away, but I couldn't get it out of my head. Over the next few weeks I found myself drawn back to that same spot, hoping to catch another glimpse. And I did. It wasn't long before I started seeing him regularly. He had a thick coat of fur, gray, with streaks of black and white. In the daylight his eyes were as dark as coal, but at night they turned a striking golden yellow. We started to develop a sort of unspoken understanding. I'd bring food, raw meat mostly, and I'd leave it for him. He'd come a little closer each time, until one day, he took the meat right out of my hand. Over the next few years, this routine became a part of my life. I'd go out to the woods and we'd spend hours together. Sometimes we'd just sit in silence. Other times we'd play. I'd throw a stick and he'd fetch it just like any regular dog. But he wasn't just a regular dog. There was something almost human in the way he watched me, the way he seemed to understand me. At first I didn't tell my wife. I didn't think she would get it. She was kind of practical, always grounded in day-to-day reality. And I was kind of afraid she would think I'd lost my mind. But one day she noticed the food supplies dwindling faster than usual, and she confronted me about it. I confessed that I had been feeding an animal in the woods. She was furious. She demanded that I stop, and insisted that it was dangerous and irresponsible. I told her I would stop, but the truth is, I wasn't gonna stop. The connection I felt with this creature, the dogman, was unlike anything I had ever experienced. I continued my visits, claiming I was going golfing. During those secret visits, we would spend hours together. He was intelligent, responding to my presence with a sort of understanding that was almost human. I would talk to him in English, and he would seem to listen, his eyes following my every move. Up close, I could see the individual strands of his fur blending together in a natural, almost hypnotic pattern. The crunch came one weekend when my wife decided to follow me. I had no idea she was trailing me as I headed to the woods, carrying a bag of food. When I reached the clearing where the dogman usually waited, he emerged from the shadows, and I greeted him as usual. Unfortunately, my wife saw this happening. She screamed, startling both me and the dogman. He backed away, disappearing into the woods, and I turned to face her. The look on her face displayed not just shock and fear, but also betrayal. That was the last straw for her. We argued a lot and she left me, eventually filing for divorce. She couldn't understand why I would risk everything for what she called a fantasy. I tried to explain, but she wouldn't listen. That divorce was messy and I lost a lot. But I never regretted my time with the dogman. I mean, looking back, I do have some regrets. I regret marrying her, knowing that we had different views and a different understanding of the world. I regret not being honest with her from the start, too. But I do not regret my time with the dogman. That creature had become my friend, and I wasn't about to abandon him. He was a loyal friend in his own way. I remember one time I was out there in the woods and a storm rolled in. It was sudden and fierce. I took shelter under a large tree, but the rain was relentless. The dogman creature stayed with me, huddled close, sharing his warmth. His fur was thick and surprisingly soft. Despite the storm, I felt safe. Another time I brought a frisbee out with me, curious to see how he'd react. I threw it, and to my surprise, he caught it mid-air just like a trained dog. We spent hours that day, me throwing and him catching, his golden eyes glowing with what I can only describe as happiness. I also noticed he had a keen sense of danger. Once while we were deep in the woods, I heard the distinct rattle of a snake. Before I could react, the dogman was on it, dispatching it quickly. He saved me from what could have been a nasty bite. Despite his wild nature, he showed a surprising amount of restraint and understanding. I remember one night I brought a small camp stove to cook some food. As I cooked, he sat across from me, watching intently, but never making a move toward the food until I offered it to him. We shared a meal, and in that moment I felt like I was dining with an old friend, rather than a mysterious predator-scavenger cryptid. There was a time when a group of hikers wandered too close to our usual spot. The dogman hid himself, watching them with those dark eyes. He seemed to understand that they were not a threat, but also not to be trusted. After they left, he emerged, sniffing the ground where they had been, almost like he was making sure they were really gone. Over the years, I learned a lot from him. He taught me to be more in tune with nature, to listen, to observe. I began to notice things I never had before. The subtle changes in the weather, the tracks of animals, the different calls of birds. The forest became a second home to me, and the dogman was a big part of that. Eventually, word of my divorce spread among my friends, and people started asking questions. I kept my story vague, saying we just grew apart. No one would have believed the truth anyway. They'd all think I was crazy if I told them about the dogman. One winter, during a particularly harsh storm, I couldn't get out to the woods for over a week. When I finally made it back, I found the dogman waiting for me. He looked thinner, his fur matted with ice. He let out a soft whine when he saw me, a sound that broke my heart. I brought extra food that day, and he ate ravenously. It reminded me of how dependent we had become on each other. As time went on, I started to notice changes in him. He seemed to age. His movements slowed down. His fur became tinged with more gray. Like all things, our time together was finite. I began to cherish our moments even more, knowing they wouldn't last forever. One of my most vivid memories is of one summer night. We were sitting by a small stream, the moonlight reflecting off the water. His eyes were that golden color, shining brightly in the darkness. We sat there for hours, the only sounds being the gentle flow of the stream and the occasional rustle of leaves. In that silence, I felt a deep connection to him, to nature, to everything around us. To him, to nature, to everything around us. I often found myself wondering about his life when he wasn't with me. Where did he go? Did he have a family? Others like him? Or was he the only one of his kind? A mutant? A creature out of legend? I never saw any signs of other creatures like him. I never found tracks or heard sounds that indicated there were more of them. Sometimes I imagine he might be from another reality, slipping through some unseen portal to our world. Maybe that's why he seems so out of place, so unique. Other times I thought he could be a natural creature, something we just hadn't discovered yet. But why only one? Why hadn't there been more sightings? Why hadn't I seen any others? Was he intelligent? Absolutely. There were times when he seemed to understand more than just basic commands. I remember one incident in particular. I had lost my wallet while hiking, and after a fruitless search I sat down, frustrated. The dogman watched me, then disappeared into the woods. A few minutes later he returned, my wallet in his mouth. He had found it and brought it back to me. And that wasn't the action of a mere animal. That was something more. Did he have family? Well, if he did, I never saw them. There were no signs of a mate or offspring. Sometimes I wondered if he was lonely, if that's why he sought out my company, or if maybe he was the last of his kind, wandering the woods in search of companionship. Our bond was something I really can't fully explain. It went beyond friendship, beyond any human-animal relationship I've ever known. He was a creature of the wild, but he was also a part of me. Losing him was like losing a piece of my soul. I still visit the woods, but it's not the same. My dogman friend is gone now. I don't know what happened to him. Maybe he moved on, maybe he passed on. But the impact he had on my life remains. I often think about those years, about the choices I made. Losing my wife was hard, but losing the dogman was harder. He was more than just a creature. He was a companion. I share this story in the hopes that it might resonate with someone out there. The world is full of mysteries, and sometimes those mysteries become parts of our lives in ways that we can't predict. I don't regret my time with the dogman. He taught me more about life, loyalty, and the wild beauty of nature than any human ever could. You can think of me as a lifelong friend of a dogman. And all that, in spite of the fact that my wife hated my werewolf friend.
If you want a coloring book full of monstrous delight, then give this a look. It'll give you a fright, right? Scary stories, coloring book, werewolf coloring book. And just to make your mind explode, it's a digital download. All it costs is $2.09, and then you will be feeling fine. Coloring monsters today, hey, it's a coloring book, hooray. Okay, link is in the description.
My brother was a werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I wanted to share a story from my past that's haunted me for decades. It's a story about my brother Morris and how our lives broke apart in the 1970s. I was a young man then, newly married, and living with my wife Sarah. My brother Morris was just 20 years old when this all started to happen. Morris and I were close despite our 7-year age difference. After our parents passed away in an accident, he moved in with Sarah and me. At first it was a pretty comfortable relationship. Morris was a good kid, but over time he became harder to talk to and even harder to control. He started to become withdrawn, becoming more reclusive and irritable. I thought it was just the stress of losing our parents, but soon I learned it was something far more sinister. One night I came home late from work and I found Morris in the backyard. He was hunched over, his body shaking uncontrollably. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. My first thought was drugs, but it turned out to be something possibly even worse than that. As I approached, I saw his body begin to change. His bones twisted and lengthened, his skin sprouted thick fur, and his face elongated into a snout. In just a matter of moments, my brother had transformed into a werewolf, one just like in the movies. I mean, a werewolf for real. I stood there frozen in shock and surprise. Morris was now a monstrous beast, and he looked at me with wild eyes that not only didn't look like my brother's eyes anymore, but they didn't look human at all. He let out a nasty growl before sprinting off into the night. I couldn't believe what I just witnessed. It defied all logic and reason. What just happened couldn't have happened, and yet it just happened. The next morning, this beast man thing came home, filthy, exhausted, covered in dirt and blood. He collapsed on the floor, and as he lay there, his body slowly reverted to the form of my brother. I carried him to his bed quietly, not wanting my wife to hear what was happening. Morris was unconscious for hours, and when he finally woke up, he had no memory of the night before. This became a horrifying routine. My brother would transform, disappear for the night, and then return at dawn. As Morris's transformations continued, his behavior became more erratic. He started hanging out with a rough and rougher crowd, guys who were into shady deals and criminal activities. They saw the potential in Morris's condition. One night he came home late, more agitated than usual. He told me about a robbery they had planned. They wanted Morris to use his strength and his fierceness as a werewolf to intimidate and overpower their targets. Well, I was pretty angry, and I was also kind of scared. I was like, Morris, you can't do that. It's too dangerous. But he was already too far gone. The potential money, the sense of power, it was too intoxicating. My criticisms hit him hard, though, as he had trusted me with very private information that he was already very upset about. My harsh reaction only got him even more upset, and it convinced him that he should go ahead with what those criminals wanted him to do. We argued, and the end result was that he stopped sharing as much information with me. His life got worse, and I was only losing my connection with him. A week later, I woke up to the sound of smashing glass and furious growls coming from downstairs. I rushed down to find Morris, half transformed, tearing through the living room. His eyes were wild, and there was blood on his claws. I tried to calm him down, but he was beyond reason. He lunged at me, and I barely managed to dodge his attack. He destroyed furniture, shattered windows, and left deep claw marks in one of the walls before he finally ran off into the night. The next morning, Sarah saw what happened. She was terrified, and she was pretty scared, too. She felt my brother was a danger to us and to our baby that she was carrying. It was hard to argue that point. I knew she was right. As much as it broke my heart, I had to protect my wife and my kid. Morris came home later that day looking remorseful. He had no memory of the night before, but the damage was evident. I told him he couldn't stay with us anymore. He was devastated, but he did understand. He knew he was a danger to us all. With nowhere else to go, Morris turned to his criminal friends. They exploited his condition, using him for their dirty work. He became a tool for their intimidation tactics. He broke into homes and he terrorized their targets. Then he didn't even remember what he'd done the following morning. Those guys were able to make crimes happen without having to do very much of the actual crime themselves, thanks to my brother's werewolf problem. He got deeper and deeper into the criminal underworld, losing his connection to me more each day. I completely lost touch with Morris by the late 80s. The last I heard, he was involved with those same rough crowds, using his werewolfism in criminal activities. I've spent countless nights wondering what became of him. Did he manage to find a way to control his transformations? Did he fall victim to his dangerous lifestyle? Did he pass away decades ago? Or is he still out there somewhere, a lone wolf wandering the streets? As I grow older, I can't help but fear that one day he might return. Not as the brother I once knew, but as a threat to my children and my grandchildren. It's a thought that really rips me up from the inside on out. Whatever happened to Morris, it wasn't a happy ending, and I don't know how I could have prevented this from happening either. That doesn't mean I don't feel guilty about it, though. I wake up sometimes at night in horror, knowing that I was not able to save my own little brother's life. Thank you for letting me share my story. It's been a pretty heavy burden to carry it, and I hope that by telling it I might find some semblance of peace. But I don't think I can ever forgive myself, because my brother was a werewolf. What's a Sputnik and a Spooner? It's our new executive producer. Please join me in welcoming our newest executive producer, Sputnik Spooner, for making this episode possible. Sputnik gets to see our secret uncensored members-only stories, of which we have 2 new ones coming out later this week. We do 4 a month, scattered about in there, and we have over 25 hours of archive stories as well, for the members who join at $3 and above. Here to explain it all is our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank. Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.